In Pennsylvania, getting urgent help for someone with a developmental disability, well, it's often been a slow and really confusing process. But that is all about to change. The state is overhauling its PUNS program. That stands for Prioritizing Urgency of Need for Services. The big idea here is to just cut through all the red tape and get help to people in crisis, faster and a whole lot more effectively. So let's break down what this really means.
All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at why the old system just wasn't working for families. Then, we'll dive into the new process, the updated tools they're using, and the super important new definition of an emergency. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together and what it actually means for people on the ground.
Okay, so let's start with the big issue. To really get why this update is so critical, we first need to understand what was broken in the first place.
It really all boiled down to this one central question. How can you possibly identify a true emergency fairly when the rules themselves are so vague? This was the fundamental challenge with the old system. See, the old system didn't have a standardized, consistent way to actually document why a situation was an emergency. And this created this huge gray area, which led to serious delays, misinterpretations, and families in real crisis just falling through the cracks, not getting the support they so desperately needed. So how is Pennsylvania fixing this? Well, that brings us to the state's new PUNS process. It's a direct response to those problems of inconsistency and all that ambiguity. The official switch is happening on February 24th, 2026. On that day, the brand new PUNS manual and all its updated forms are going to go into effect. The goal here is simple. Create one strong, consistent system across the entire state for identifying and responding to emergencies. But look, a new process is only as good as the tools you use to make it work, right? So let's check out the updated toolkit that's going to make all of this possible. The state has introduced 3 key things. First, there's a completely revised PUNS manual. Think of it as the new rulebook. Second, and this is a real game changer, there's a brand new PUNS supplemental form for assessments. And third, they've updated the existing DP 1055 form to make sure everything lines up perfectly. Now, this new supplemental form, it's really the heart of the entire update. It's basically a guided questionnaire with specific, targeted questions designed to build a full picture of someone's health and safety risks. This gives officials the concrete details they need to stop guessing and start making truly informed decisions about what an emergency actually is. And all of this leads to maybe the most critical part of the update. For the first time, there's going to be a clear, consistent definition of what a true emergency actually looks like. You can see the shift right here. We're moving away from these vague guidelines that were totally open to interpretation and towards clear, specific definitions of risk. This isn't about guesswork anymore. It's about having a documented checklist for what really threatens someone's health and safety. So what does that actually look like in the real world? Well, the new guidelines clearly define emergencies to include situations like a sudden caregiver crisis, say the death or a severe illness of a parent. It also covers things like an unsafe living situation, someone transitioning out of an institution, or a young adult aging out of foster care with no support. This kind of clarity is a huge deal. So we have a new process, we have new definitions, but who's actually in charge of making all this happen? Let's break down the rollout and who's responsible for what. The roles are laid out really clearly. Think of supports coordinators as the frontline folks, the case managers, using these new forms to assess and document what's needed. Then you have the regional administrative entities, or AEs, who are kind of like supervisors, making sure everyone is following the same playbook. And finally, the regional ODP offices are there to provide backup and support. It's a structured approach, from top to bottom, all to guarantee consistency. Okay. So after all these new forms, all these new processes, what does it all mean? For the people and the families who really rely on these services, why does any of this actually matter? Here's the bottom line. This whole effort is designed for one thing: better identification of people in crisis, streamlined paperwork to prove their need, and most importantly, getting support to Pennsylvanians faster, right when they need it most. And you don't just have to take my word for it. This comes directly from the Office of Developmental Programs. Their stated goal is to strengthen identification and enhance documentation. In short, it's all about building a smarter, more responsive system for everyone. So this all leaves us with one final thought. By moving from ambiguity to clarity, Pennsylvania isn't just updating a process, it's signaling a whole new commitment to its most vulnerable citizens.
The big question now is, will these clearer guidelines end up setting a new standard for compassionate and effective care everywhere? I guess we'll just have to wait and see.